As coaches, we often like to get into lengthy discussions about what exercise is best for X, what exercise is best for Y. But what is less talked about is how we load these certain exercises and how the load impacts the execution of the exercise as well as the outcomes. So a key concept to implement within our program design and exercise selection is the concept of biasing positions and challenging muscles. So in terms of biasing positions, we're thinking about how we can use a load to help bias and get into certain positions a little bit better. And then challenge is the opposite end of that, where we're using the load to challenge our ability and our muscles to kind of stay in a certain position. So with every bias comes a challenge, and with every challenge there's a bias. If we take a split squat, for example, I can either load it ipsilaterally, contralaterally, or bilaterally. So if I take an ipsilateral load, so having the weight in the same arm as my leg that is forward, I'm going to be biasing my hip into external rotation. So that load's going to be pulling me into external rotation. But at the same time, it's going to be challenging my ability to maintain internal rotation. And then if I flip the weight onto the other side, if I have the weight contralaterally, it's going to be biasing my hip into this internal rotation, but also challenging my ability to maintain that external rotation. And that would be the exact same if I did something like a single leg RDL as well. So when we are building upon what we talked about previously in some other posts about how training is the assessment, if I notice that someone's completing a single leg RDL or a split squat and they're getting into this relatively external rotated position, I can then use this knowledge of how I can challenge or bias a position by altering how I load that exercise. So if I notice that if I'm just bilaterally loading a single leg RDL and someone's going into quite a lot of external rotation with that back leg, if I use a contralateral load as well as focusing on that, I can help bias myself into maintaining a bit more internal rotation at that back hip. And then if I want to then challenge that ability once I've got better at getting into that position, I can then put the load into the other hand, it's laterally, which is going to bias me into external rotation, but challenge that ability to maintain internal rotation. So once I've built a good foundation of being able to maintain that hip internal rotation, I can now challenge that ability to maintain that internal rotation with that back hip by placing the load in the other hand. And the exact same for a split squat. If I want to challenge my ability to maintain internal rotation of this front hip, I can load on that other side there. If someone is lacking internal rotation, I can help try pull them into a little bit more relative internal rotation by loading on the other side.